Hey everybody, my name is Dom, and in this video I want to talk about the new Set 6 neutral legendary Badb Catha, or Badb Catha, or Badb Catha. Some combination of Irish dialects that I know nothing about. You could also just call her Badb Catha, if that's what you prefer. I want to use her as a platform to touch on, more broadly, the draw of unique card effects, modality, and some of the strengths and weaknesses associated, and then evolution as a form of card advantage. First things first, let's read the effect. Badb Catha, 3 cost, 2/3, neutral follower. Fanfare, choose one of 3 options. Number 1, select another follower on your field and give it +1/+1. Another follower, meaning you cannot select this follower. Option 2, give your leader +2 defense. Option 3, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put any number on top in any order, and any number on the bottom in any order. You may split them, you can leave them together, you have full control. You can also pay 2 to evolve this, making it a 5 cost 4/5 follower. On evolve, choose one of 3 options. Number 1, engage each enemy follower on the field. Option 2, deal 2 damage to the enemy leader. And option 3, put the top card of your deck into your EX area. The card that immediately comes to mind when I read Badb is Dark Angel Olivia. Neutral, legendary, 5 cost modal card. I think there's some pretty clear similarities there. And part of the reason I really want to give Badb some time is my experience with Olivia. When this card was coming out, I feel like I underrated it a little bit. By no means did I think this was a bad card or anything, but she plays better than I thought that she was going to play. And a lot of that to me is attributed to the modality. So Badb doesn't read as strong as Olivia to me at first glance, but that doesn't mean she can't grow on me the way Olivia did. Since I was already talking about Dow, let's use her as a baseline point of comparison. I think the most common mode for Olivia is 5 cost 5/5, gain 3 life, draw 1 card. Badb Catha can do something similar, a side grade variation of that play. If we plane evolve her in the same turn, we're looking at a 5 cost 4/5, gain 2 life, and put the top card of our deck into EX area. Being an evolved follower means we can use an Evo point to get her down 1 turn earlier, or on a later turn in the game, we can save 1 play point that we want for something else. So, difference there, but being an evolved follower means we have to commit Evo deck space. So, you give and you take. Now, 4/5 instead of 5/5, because this is an evolved follower, we have Rush. In some board states, a 4/5 with Rush will be better than a 5/5. Now, gaining 2 life instead of gaining 3, in 99% of cases, this will be worse. It is what it is. Now, drawing a card versus putting a card into the EX area. It sounds worse to have the card go into the EX area because our opponent will have information of that card. But I think in a lot of scenarios that won't matter at all. For example, imagine you're playing Haven, you go second, and on turn 4, you evolve this card, and you put a Themis Decree into your EX area. Did that change the play that your opponent was going to make on their turn 5? I would argue no. A good player, an informed player, someone who is knowledgeable about what types of cards could be in your deck, will already be respecting a Themis Decree. Whether it's face up or not, their turn 5 play is either going to be aimed at forcing you to use the card or not overextending into the card. It doesn't matter if they know it's there or not. They are going to be respecting it already. So information is certainly not something you want to voluntarily give to your opponent. It is a downside, but it is not to be overstated. It's not that bad. Now, another pretty important difference is the relationship between putting it into the EX area and discard effects. If your opponent plays a card like Dark Angel Olivia and they make you discard a card, if the card you flipped and put into your EX area is a card that you don't need at the moment, it's one of the more situational cards in your deck, or it's not good in the matchup, whatever the case may be, and you want to discard it, you can't. It is not a valid target for discard. But what that also means is if your opponent is playing Abyss and they use Crazed Executioner, they can't hit the card that you put into your EX. And if that was your best card, it is safe against Crazed Executioner. It is safe against random Rule and Eye discards. There are merits to being in this EX area. And that's not even considering cards like Tin Soldier, which will get a benefit from being put into the EX. So overall, very comparable to a card draw. I think the baseline gain 2 life and draw a card is very comparable to Olivia. You could consider this card in any deck where you are playing Olivia for just that function. Now, obviously, these are modal cards, and their alternative modes are very different, and they are what we need to evaluate. But at the baseline, we can see that these slot similarly into a deck, and they have a similar base rate. One of the things I think I undervalued about Olivia was the discard effect. And not the strength of discarding, but the presence of discard on a neutral card. Typically, we only find discard effects in Abyss, but Olivia is a neutral card. So here with Badb Catha, I want to look at some of the more unique effects, things that are not available to all classes. And in particular, I want to look at the Scry 3 deck manipulation effect on the base form, and I want to look at the engage each enemy follower on the field on the evolve form. Let's start by looking at the deck manipulation. To my knowledge, there are only 4 cards in the entire game that offer any sort of deck manipulation, and only the Will to Overtake offers it on a scale that is on the same level as Badb Catha. A common trend between all 4 of these cards is that when they are played, it is not primarily for the deck manipulation mode. Shinko Windy and Sammy Wizard's Apprentice, first and foremost, are 1-drops for decks that want 1-drops. The strength of their 1-card deck manipulation is dubious at best. They could very easily be goblins and likely would be better than what they are. Star Reader Stella. If you've seen my Hybrid Rune video, you know I like this card a lot, but when I included it in that deck, it was not for the deck manipulation. It was primarily for the spell chain acceleration and for the value that it provides. The deck manipulation and consistency boosts came secondary. Now, the Will to Overtake, this is the most important one to be looking at because it's the one that provides the same scale of manipulation, manipulating 3 cards. When this card was used in Smart Falcon Uma, it was more than just a consistency piece. Having an amulet on the board that could be bounced by Smart Falcon was very valuable. You could set it up on a turn prior to Smart Falcon and know that you would be able to trust your opponent wouldn't remove it before getting back to your turn. You could pre-invest play points for a bigger Smart Falcon play using this card. It was a cheap investment, and then the consistency had value afterwards. Additionally, in Uma, Mayano Top Gun likes having cheap cards that you can put to the board and enable her to gain Storm. So again, while the deck manipulation is nice, there is the big use case for the residual amulet afterwards. In Haven, this card is often sacrificed for Dark Offering. Again, using the residual amulet for something useful. Now, to separate the effect from these specific cards a little bit, to start getting more general, is checking 3 useful? I said checking 1 was a little bit dubious, but checking 3, yes. I do think 3 is pretty good. This is not an effect that, to me, feels like it scales linearly. I would argue that if we compare something that checks 2 versus something that checks 1, it is more than twice as effective. The extra information that you get from looking at more cards at once is great. Now, I'm sure there are diminishing returns if you checked 20 cards at once, sure. But between 1 and 3, 3 is dramatically more appealing than something that checks 1. Now, this effect being neutral means it is offered to decks that don't already have it. Are there decks that I think would like this effect? One that comes to mind immediately is Dirt Rune. A lot of the issue with that deck comes from needing to have both stack spenders and stack builders at the same time in your hand. And the consistency increase that you could get from rearranging the top 3 cards of your deck is very appealing to that deck. But I think Dirt needs that attached to a 1-cost stack amulet. Something that you could slot in alongside a card like Teachings of Creation, potentially an alternative to Witch's Cauldron. Is Badb Catha offering something appealing to decks that might want that effect? I would argue no. The 3 cost 2/3 body is tough to swallow. That is not something that you want to be playing. So when you're choosing this mode, you're paying a pretty hefty premium to get this effect. Looking at Chinka Windy and the Will to Overtake, I don't think you're paying very much to get this effect. You've already got a pretty usable, versatile card there. Badb Catha, you have to get some real serious value out of her being able to evolve, or from the general modality of the card, to make choosing the Scry 3 mode worth it. At least that's how I am feeling about the card right now. Moving on to the Board Engage effect. Again, pretty uncommon in the game, relatively exclusive to Sword. I could only find 4 cards in the entire card pool that provide this effect. Let's start with Hair of Illusions, since it's the only non-follower here. Usually when this card is included in a deck, it is with the expectation that you are going to use the 10 cost effect, banishing the entire board, as an out to something like Heavenly Aegis. The 0 cost engaged enemy follower effect is more of something that you can do to make this not a complete brick in your hand while you're waiting for turn 10. There is Amulet synergy in Haven, Holy Sentinel, and Skullfane in particular, where a 0 cost amulet, something that you can play and crack for 0, is strong. But they decided that the engage effect on here is something that is fair to give to a 0 cost card. A completely free effect, just 1 card in hand, you get an engage. So we can see that the designers, at least for the Haven class, did not evaluate this as a particularly powerful effect. It is not something that needs to be priced very high. When we look at Swordsman, we see something similar. And Swordsman is the standout card on this list as probably the most powerful, and I'm certain the most played. 1 cost 2/1 is a very low floor. This is already a card that for a deck that wants to be playing 1-drops, having a body on turn 1, this is already a good floor. On Fanfare and on Activate, being able to engage a follower, if you use both in the same turn, we're looking at a 1 cost 2/1 that engages 2 things. So we're getting a real card to the board. We're not losing a card the way Hair of Illusions is. The opponent still has to respond to the Swordsman. And we're getting 2 engages. So again, this effect is priced pretty cheap. But something that's pretty important to recognize is that neither Swordsman or Hair of Illusions help you get rid of the follower that you're engaging. They are not independent cards. Hair of Illusions is an amulet, it can't attack, and even if it could, it would be sacrificed before you could. And then Swordsman, with the Fanfare, he doesn't have Rush, unless you have Leonidas' Resolve. So, for the most part, he does not have Rush, he cannot attack what you're engaging. And then the activated ability, he has to engage, so he still won't be able to attack. I think part of the reason that this is priced so cheap on these cards is because they are reliant on another card to do the rest of the work. They only get halfway there. That's why I think when we look at Biko Pegasus and Shadow Assassin, we're looking at a bit more of an investment to get that effect. Biko Pegasus, it costs 2 to get the engage with Rush. So, more expensive there. Evo deck commitment. Shadow Assassin, this card, it reads pretty good. The combination of being able to engage a follower and then when she evolves, destroying an engaged follower, very appealing. But I think what holds this card back is the slot on the curve. 6 play points to get this effect is a little bit out there. In particular in Sword, doing just this as a turn 6 play is a bit tough to swallow. So Badb Catha being cheaper, having a more potent effect than Shadow Assassin, well, debatably, they're not quite the same, but having more going on for her versatility-wise than Shadow Assassin, I think it's worth keeping an eye on Badb Catha for this board engage effect. Shadow Assassin's a card that I've always really liked, just never found a home. So Badb Catha, that might be it. So do I think these previously class-exclusive abilities are appealing on a neutral card? Do I think there are decks that want access to these effects that did not have it before? If we're talking about the board engage, I do think, yes, there are decks that would be able to take advantage of this. I think it's the most impactful mode on the card. The biggest swings in game state will come from board states where you can effectively take advantage of that. It really can drive the nail in the coffin on advantaged board states. So this is the effect that I think makes you consider the card. The deck manipulation, there are decks that want this effect. I do think there are decks that want this effect. But I don't think the decks that want this effect can afford to be playing a 3-cost 2/3. They are too piece reliant. They really need multi-card interactions, which also means they need to pay for those multi-card interactions. The play point investment of this 3-drop is likely too high for those types of decks. So if you're looking at the engage each enemy follower and you feel good about it, this is probably on the table. If you just want the scry effect, I don't think this is the card for you. Before moving on to talk about the rest of the modes on this card in more depth, to discuss the modality of the card, I want to bring up Trial Initiation. This is technically a modal card. You are choosing one of two options when you play this card. But in 99% of cases, there is only one choice with this card. The BNW recursion is reserved for, let's call it a meme deck. It might be better than that. We're going to call it a meme deck. There's only really one option on this card, despite technically being a modal card. So when I think about the modality of Badb Catha, I want to think about Trial Initiation, where modality can be sort of an illusion. If the modes are not good, if you would never choose them, are the modes legitimate? Are they actually something that provides flexibility to this card? So now let's evaluate the individual modes of Badb Catha. I think it's fair to ignore the top deck manipulation. I don't value it very highly. If you do, that's all right. So we're basically looking at an understated fencer attached to an overcosted frog cleric. Fencer in set 1, I would argue, was somewhere in the realm of fringe playable. That seems fair to me. Sword, I think, is the best class for this effect, and if it was at best fringe playable in Sword, we're not off to a great start with that mode. But not terrible, let's say. Not the worst thing ever. There are much worse cards than Fencer. Frog Cleric. I've basically only seen this card used in Alana Haven. Some Control Haven decks have tried to include it as a massive playpoint sink. So if it was being used as a massive playpoint sink, that's not something we can compare Badb Catha to. We're basically just looking at the gain 2 life, where it was used for the trigger, the life gain trigger. So as far as that goes, Badb Catha is pretty alright, and we're paying an extra play point for the modality, but maybe that's okay. So the individual modes, not mind-blowing, but reasonable at least on the base form. As for the modes on the evolve side, again, I like the board engage mode. I think that's the one that you really want to be looking at, and then you can use the burn and the card draw as fallback plans when needed. Harbinger of Night shows that we're getting a pretty fair rate for the burn effect. Opportunity cost aside, playpoint wise, it's a reasonable rate. Rosa Mechwing Maiden, we're not getting the greatest price for a neutral evolve and draw card follower, but this card has ward, so there's some give and take there. Again, we're not too far off from something that people at least have experimented with. So neither of these is particularly amazing cards, so I wouldn't say Badb Catha is in great company, but as fallback plans to the board-wide engage that she offers, it could be a lot worse. After looking at all these modes in isolation, when I think back to Trial Initiation, does this card have that same false modality? No. Even the weakest modes on this card, which I would say are on the base, manipulating the top of your deck, and on the evolve, burning the enemy leader, they are still going to find uses in very specific scenarios. They are at least going to do something. The second mode on Trial Initiation in the vast majority of UMA decks does nothing. You could say it triggers spell synergies, but so does choosing the other mode on that card. They are no different there. So the modes on this card are at least real things that you could select. Now, are any of them spectacular? Maybe engaging the enemy board is. Maybe that one's going to have some very powerful use cases. But for the most part, everything that I've compared this card to has been pretty medium. They are not the worst cards in the game, but also not the best cards in the game. Where this card will potentially shine over those individual cards is in the card compression. You're getting multiple of those effects in one slot in your deck. And then the way these effects interact with each other. I think we can look at how these abilities interact with each other in two ways. One on a more micro level, the way the base form feeds directly into the evolve form. And then on a more macro level, the way the presence of one ability affects the value of another ability, how it provides strength to the card in various game states, advantage positions, board states, things like that. So if we look at just the base form, giving another follower on the field +1/+1 is reliant on us having board presence, while the rest of the effects on the base form do not. That means this card can be usable both when we do and don't have board's presence. When we are the aggressor, we can like that +1/+1. If we are the defender, maybe we like the life gain. Maybe we need to fix our deck for specific answers. So this card can be good in various game plan scenarios. If we're behind on board, if we are really trying to dig ourselves out of a hole, the +1/+1 is likely not going to be that valuable, and the 2 life gained might not reach a new lethal breakpoint. So we've got a fallback Hail Mary plan with the looking at the top 3 cards and fishing for a very specific answer in our deck, the only potential out to our opponent's board. So relative to each other, I think these make the card useful in more board states than something like a Fencer does. Now for the evolve, similar thing here. When we've got board presence, we can use the engage. When we don't, we can use either the card draw or the burn. When we're the aggressor, we like the burn. Maybe we even like the board engage because we can force the opponent into very inefficient trades on their following turn. If we're playing for a long game, that engage is good and the card draw is good. If we're looking for a short game, maybe the burn is good. Or if we just need card draw, if we need to find specific removal or something to deal with a more aggressive opponent, we can look at the card draw. So there's different positions that this evolve is useful in. Now for the specific interactions between the base and the evolve, I like that you can use the +1/+1 to make a follower useful when you engage the entire enemy board and want to swing in. The +1/+1 can help you make trades that you otherwise wouldn't. If we're just trying to be aggressive and push damage, the +1/+1 pairs really nicely with the 2 damage burn. That's a 3 damage swing on just this one card. So great there. And then playing for more long games, gaining 2 life, buffers against our opponent's potential aggression. And then we can use the engage to remove their followers, draw the game out longer. If they don't have a board, if we don't have a board, we can just gain life and draw a card. There are a lot of very specific interactions that play well between these 2 effects. And the one big one that will lead me to the evolutionist card advantage is when we play Badb Catha and don't evolve her on the same turn. When we just drop this card and say that we're happy with the base form, the evolve takes on kind of a new function. Often when we see a card with evolve, there's an expectation that it will be played and evolved in the same turn. This is not always true, but it is a general trend. There are 3 main reasons for this. Number 1, the card has no effect until it evolves. It is a vanilla on its base. An example here is Tweedledum Tweedledee. Number 2, which is an extension of number 1, the card has a strike effect, which means it will not get its effect until it uses the rush from evolving to leverage that strike. And reason number 3, the card's too integral to your game plan, and if you risk it getting removed by your opponent before it gets back to your turn, you are throwing, basically. If we evaluate Badb Catha along these criteria, we can see she's not vanilla. Her base form has a fanfare. It's not a strike. She does not need to evolve to get her effect off on the base form. And then when we do evolve her, it is not a game plan defining ability. It is more of a utility effect that we like to have. With this line of thinking, I think it's fair to say that Badb Catha is a candidate for a card that does not need to be played and evolved in the same turn. If the base form is good enough, if we feel good about playing the base, we could, in theory, not even include the evolve in our deck. The reason I'm so interested in evaluating if this card needs to be evolved the turn it's played is because of the experience I've had with similar followers, cards that don't need to be evolved. I would like to argue that if you have a follower that does not require the evolve to be good, then every time you do evolve it, you gain card advantage. It is a +1. It is a play point sink. It is a desirable strength of the card. And I'm going to use Forest to illustrate this point. Let's look at this classic Forest opener. Turn 1, we play Harvest Festival. Pass to the opponent. Doesn't really matter what they do. Turn 2, we play an Ancient Elf. Bounce the Harvest Festival. We've got the 3/3. We feel like we got a good value out of this. We did something that we wanted. Proactive. Cool. Good play. Pass to the opponent's turn 2. Surefire Bullet. 1 for 1. Back to neutral. Forest feels good. They did something proactive. They accomplished what they wanted to do. So this is not terrible for Forest. But 1 for 1 neutral situation here. Let's look at scenario 2. Same starter. Harvest Festival. Empty turn 1. Play Ancient Elf. Bounce it, but now the opponent does not have a response on their turn 2. So we get back to turn 3, we get to play the Harvest Festival and bounce it, and now we've got the 5/5 Ancient Elf. We swing for 5, maybe we attack one of their followers, maybe we go face, doesn't really matter. We got the 5/5 Ancient Elf. Pass to the opponent for their turn 3, they play Serpent Wrath. And I repeat, Serpent Wrath, only 1 S. This looks like situation number 1. 1 for 1 removal, spell for follower. But this feels much more Forest favored than situation number 1. The turn 3 for Forest did not require them to play cards from hand. They were able to play cards from the Evolve deck. They sort of drew a card from thin air by evolving. Ancient Elf's Evolve is basically like playing a Nature's Guidance here. Nature's Guidance is a hand-sized neutral bounce effect. You spend the card from hand and it replaces itself. Here with Ancient Elf, we don't have to spend a card from hand, but we don't draw a card from the deck. We drew it from the Evolve deck, and we placed it to the board. So hand-sized neutral, but we've got a larger board presence for it. So for 1 play point, we got hand-sized neutral bounce, which is already good on Nature's Guidance, and we've got some stat increases going on. This is great. Sure, it's still a 1 for 1 removal, and maybe you could say that the Dragon player here removed both the turn 2 and the turn 3 play from Forest using a single card. But Forest already got the value from its turn 2 and its turn 3 play. The removal is an after effect. So maybe my reasoning here is not perfect, and maybe this is something that's holding me back in the game, but I feel like by being able to play a card that Forest was already happy with, and then having the option to spend more play points on a subsequent turn for an evolve that was not needed to make the card feel good, Forest sort of drew a card from thin air with this interaction. If I'm incorrect, feel free to debate me on this one. Just trying to get better here, but I think this makes sense. Hopefully these concepts that I started thinking about by looking at this card, the draw of unique effects to neutral followers, the conditions for modality to be valuable, and evolution as card advantage, especially that one. Hopefully I presented those ideas well enough that you can kind of see where I'm coming from. Those ideas might not be fully fleshed out. I did not put infinite time into those concepts, but I think there is something there that's worth thinking about, and if you can iron out those concepts, at least to me, I think for my personal improvement, I want to iron out those concepts because I think they shape a better player. Now, looking at this card specifically, on the whole, the unique effects that she offers, the Scry 3 I don't think is that big of a deal, but the engage each enemy follower, that is good. I do think that mode is good. The modality, I think being good in advantaged and disadvantaged states is nice. However, this modality comes at a cost. She is mostly a medium level card in any of her functions. The stats and the number on the top left corner there, the play point cost, they don't line up very well. I think the modality is coming at a cost. This one extra play point on the card. She costs one more than I feel like she needs to, but that is the price for the modality. Is her modality strong enough to offset that cost? Unfortunately, I think no. And then when we look at the evolutionist card advantage, because that is what could save this card. If the modality is being priced at one extra play point, but we can get away with evolving for card advantage, we can make something work there. But when I used Ancient Elf as an example, that was for a specific reason. One, I'm comfortable with Force, but two, Ancient Elf, when you play her as just the 2-drop 3/3, in a lot of states, that's good enough. You don't always need to evolve that card to feel like you progressed your game forward, to feel like you put your opponent in a lot of pressure. Badb Catha does not do that. I think if you play this on your turn 3, it's just not going to put enough pressure. You're going to get put into a disadvantaged position on the following turn. And what did I say about her modes? The disadvantaged position is the weakest one for her. So overall, I think the card just does not pack enough punch for what you're trying to get it to do. If I saw a deck that had Dark Angel Olivia in it, and then somebody swapped it for a Badb Catha, would I question them? No, not really. I think if a deck is playing Olivia and they choose to play this instead, fair enough. There are enough arguments between the two cards that you could use this as a substitute for that. But this is going to lead me into the final section of the video. Is this a card that you need to be playing in your decks? Is this going to make the deck better? I think something that happens with these more flexible or synergy-focused cards is you run into scenarios where you find decks that make the card good, or you find decks that make the card work. You can see lines of play where this card would function, where it would make sense, where you could make a play that functions. But you might not be making the deck better by including it. For example, Winged Inversion in Control Abyss. There are plenty of Angels and Fallen Angel followers that you could include in a Control Abyss deck, or at least during set 3, set 4, you could consider playing Winged Inversion for. And that deck likes having cards in the grave. If you discard an Israfil, which is an Angel, you can destroy an enemy follower, and then you have it set up for your Death's Breath. That makes this card look pretty good. That makes this card work. You're doing the thing. This card makes sense. But does that mean the best versions of Control Abyss should be playing this card? Not necessarily. Just because a card makes sense, just because a card looks good, and just because there are scenarios where it is good, it doesn't mean it's the best version of the deck. It doesn't mean that you need to include the card. That's why testing cards is so important. We're at a point in the game where decks will have more than 40 cards that they would like to include, but you're only going to be including 40, so something's going to get cut. A good example, if you've seen my Hybrid Rune video, Star Reader Stella, if I was playing that deck more and more and more, it's very likely that I would have taken that card out of the deck. Despite how much I liked the card and enjoyed the card, I don't think the best versions of that concept would include the card. Badb Catha, I think, will fall into a similar camp as these cards here. There are a lot of scenarios that I can envision where she's good. There are decks, and I will bring one up here in a second, where she could potentially be really good, but the best version of the deck might just be better off replacing her with something else. Maybe more removal, maybe just another 1-drop, something like that. The deck that I currently think will be the best home for Badb Catha is Heal Haven or Lana's Haven. And there's a couple reasons. The level 1 most obvious reason is that this deck buffs followers when you gain life. Badb Catha's a follower. that gains life. So she does the thing all in one card. But there are plenty of cards in the game that are followers that heal. What does she offer that's particularly important to the deck? I said the most appealing mode on Badb Catha is the board engage, and the way to get use of that is to have board presence, especially high statted followers, and that's where Heal Haven can really take advantage of the card. That deck makes really big boards. You can have followers that eventually will be unanswerable. You reach a point where you can one-shot your opponent in one turn because the stats on the followers are so high. So you could use a card like Badb Catha to control the opponent's board with your overstated followers and reach a point where you just one-shot them because the numbers are so big. On top of that, the stat gain on the base form of Badb Catha, if you don't have Alana's, but you do have board presence, you can still use that. You can use the deck manipulation if you're really fishing for one more card that will trigger the life gain. You can just draw cards. There are a lot of things I think that fit well with this deck. Now, does that deck want to give up Evo deck space for Badb Catha? Do they want to fit a card that high on the curve? Are they okay with playing just the 3 cost 2/3 gain life? That's where you have to try the card, but this I think is a good example of where Badb Catha makes sense but might not be the best choice. Another deck that might be cool to try this card in is this mythical unicorn control sword list that the designers seem to be pushing. If anybody's got that one, I don't know if I'll get around to trying it, but it sounds cool. And that is the end of the video. Thanks for watching, or thanks for listening. I know there really wasn't much going on screen. I'm going to assume that if you made it this far that you enjoyed it. I'm glad you did. Or at least that you didn't hate it. Hope you didn't. There may have been some repetition and structural errors here and there. I will admit that this was medium effort, loosely scripted, recorded in chunks, so I noticed some of these issues, but I did not want to re-record and super edit down all these little mistakes. I think this is good enough. It's good enough for me. I hope it's good enough for you. If I did not present my ideas well enough here, put a timestamp, put a little comment, explain what you want me to clarify, and I will do my best. You could always message me on Discord. You can find me in the community server. Same name, same profile picture, all that. Now, if you did understand what I said, if I presented myself well enough that you could see where I'm coming from, but you think I'm wrong, please be nice. Don't call me stupid. But rip me a new one. Points, evidence, reasoning, please be specific on what is incorrect. If you think I was on the right track but just didn't get all the way there, do absolutely feel free to add on. If you think there's more conditions to be met for some of the things that I said to be true, especially evolution as card advantage, add on. Absolutely add on. My previous video, the hybrid rune archetype breakdown, was made sort of on request. I'd received multiple messages on Discord from people I'd played webcam games with that were interested in the list and some of the thoughts behind the list, either for themselves or to show to some of their friends at the locals. This video was made for me. The primary purpose was my own personal growth and improvement as a player. By forcing myself to verbalize some ideas that I have, some of the things I started thinking about when I looked at this card, I was hoping to pick at flaws in my logic and maybe correct some things that I'd never realized I wasn't fully thinking about correctly. By posting this video, hopefully somebody more skilled or experienced than myself can also point out some flaws in the reasoning that I present. And then if somebody else finds this rambling helpful, finds any of the points that a commenter might raise helpful, all the better. If I come up with an idea for another discussion or concept exploration type video, I will likely do another video like this in the future. If anybody has an idea with specific card examples that might be worth looking into, I would love to look at it. If I can come up with enough to feel satisfied with a video, I will likely put one together. And I think with that, thanks for watching, and bye.